out through what you already know, I think what you get is you get truth that rings in your ear. Like you it's like that sounds right to me, right? There's not very many times that people, when I explain how your nervous system works and I explain exactly what's going on with you, that I have someone say, no, Jason, that doesn't sound right to me at all. The ones that do are usually, I had one medical doctor, an anesthesiologist that came in the office, and he did. It was it was my fault. It was a bad approach the way that I tried to explain it to him, but I ran him off on one visit just because he was like, "No, that's not what I know," and I'm like, "Yep, I know that's not what you know, but that's what's happening to you, and that's the way that your brain's firing, and we can help you with that because he had a shoulder problem. Is why he came in, right? And so I want to just continue. I want to continue talking about some of the things because I thought last Thursday's show, Friday, I was off. We replayed the end of Alzheimer's book review, and because my mom got her knee replaced on Friday, and she's doing awesome. She did a good job over the weekend. She's getting along, and she's going to recover great, I'm sure. But I got to spend Friday with her, my dad, and then the weekend with them, helping them get through the weekend, and so that's why I wasn't here on Friday last week. But on Thursday night, we got into some definitions and we got into our heart rate variability and the definition of sympathetic and parasympathetic activity. And I want to just kind of easily or real quickly just refresh our memory about that. And hopefully I can get you to I had some comments that said, "Hey, that was very helpful," right? So maybe I can do a little bit of that again tonight and then move forward with some of those definitions and kind of wrap back around in the show about one of the sentences I heard at the hospital when I was picking up my mom after her surgery, and they were going through the discharge papers, and they were talking about her knee and osteoarthritis, and they're like, and that's what caused your knee replacement in the first place, right? And I was like, and I didn't say anything, but I was thinking in my head, no, that's not what caused her knee replacement. Her knee replacement was caused from abnormal function in that knee. And the question is, why did she have abnormal function in the knee? Not what is it called? And there's your biggest difference right there. There's your biggest difference between a wellness doctor and a non-wellness doctor. And it doesn't mean chiropractor or non-chiropractor. It doesn't mean chiropractor or medical doctor. It just means, because there's lots of medical doctors who do wellness, right? There's lots of physical therapists that are wellness minded. There's lots of occupational therapists, or there's lots of people that work on wellness, and there's people that don't. And so osteoarthritis is not what caused my mom to have knee replacement. Abnormal function of that knee joint over time is what caused my mom to have knee replacement. Abnormal function of that knee joint over time ended up with the term osteoarthritis. So what they're saying is this definition that we created with that, the definition of the process is what they're saying is the reason for her knee replacement. And for me, it's the process, not the definition. Right? I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's what I'm talking about right there. It's like, well, it's not about the name. The name is just a word that we use to describe the process of something. And that's kind of when we got into that last week, we got into that sympathetic and parasympathetic part of our nervous system. And that's kind of what I want to get back into tonight, because one of the things when we do our heart rate variability is we have a graph, and if you're listening on the radio, just imagine if you have an opportunity, just put a plus sign right in the middle of a piece of paper. And the things that we were measuring sympathetic activity, which is fight or flight. And we were also measuring parasympathetic activity, which is rest and recover. And that's what I want to get in tonight is that rest and recover. Okay, so the fight or flight. Everybody knows fight or flight response, right? You something threatens you and you get scared, or you decided to take the trash out after dark and you had to carry the trash down the alley to the dumpster. You all of a sudden have this heightened level of awareness about you, right? You jump at shadows, or you think you see something, or it's a little scary in the dark because it's unknown, right? We can't see it. So our right brain is processing all that, and we have this innate intelligence inside our body that tells us, hey, our right brain is worried about whether or not we've got alligators or snakes or tigers. Is there some sort of threat that lurks in the dark? And that ramps up that right brain right there because it's unknown. And that right brain has an affinity for adrenaline. And whenever we drive our adrenaline, we drive that right side, and we go into what's called our fight or flight response. We are ready to fight, or we are ready to run. And that's our sympathetic nervous system. That's our brain communicating with our body in a very heightened state of alertness right there, ready to fight or run. And what happens in sympathetic stress is that everything in the core shuts down: digestion, immune system, reproduction, posture. Everything in the core shuts down. The blood gets pushed out to the periphery. Our heart rate goes up. Our blood pressure goes up. Our stomach acid turns off, right? That's what happens when we're in sympathetic fight or flight response. Now, once we get back in the house and there's no threat, our brain says, okay, now we're back in a safe place. So it goes into parasympathetic activity, which is rest and recover. And now we're all the things that matter for tomorrow kick in. All the things that it says, hey, look, what's important for tomorrow? Well, digesting food is important, right? If you're going to live till tomorrow, you need to be able to have some nutrients to carry you through. So now digestion is important. So the parasympathetic part of your nervous system says, hey, I better increase the stomach acid. I better get ready to move things through my gut, through my bowels, through my small intestine, through my large intestine. I better be ready for all that because I'm going to be living for a longer period of time. I need to get my immune system to function properly and maintain itself for a long period of time. I need to make good decisions. I need to make calm, rational decisions. I need to be able to get along with people. So all that frontal lobe activity kicks in whenever we're in that parasympathetic response. And then we get into a state of rest and recovery. But one of the things that happens whenever we do our heart rate variability test is this horizontal line. So if you've got that plus sign in the middle of your paper, the horizontal line that's going across is measuring the parasympathetic activity, the rest and recover. And that rest and recover part of our nervous system is the part that what happens as we start to lose our health is that we start getting a down regulation of parasympathetic activity. Maybe those are too big of words. The rest and recover part of our nervous system starts to fade. And we start moving in this direction. We start moving from right to left. If the right side of the plus sign is the positive increased activity of rest and recover, then the left side is the decrease of rest and recover. So what does that mean? That when I say you're not resting and recovering, right? If you show up over here, somewhere on this line, and you're to the left of center, it means you're not resting and recovering. And so I had a report today with a guy, and I was talking to him, and that's where he was. And what he said, his wife was with him, and she said, "You mean I'm not sleeping? He's not sleeping?" And I said, "No, it doesn't mean you're not sleeping. It means that you're not recovering. Your body is fighting, but it's not recovering. It's fighting because your sympathetic nervous system is still kicked in. You're somewhere over in the top left quadrant of the plus sign. But the parasympathetic, it just means that you've got so much adrenaline that you're able to handle your day. Like you get up in the morning, but you're exhausted, but you just got to get yourself a big old tall coffee, right? And then you realize, man, whatever drives you. Let's say it's your bills. Let's say you know that we just came to the first of the month, right? Got to make the house payment, got to make the car payment, got to make the insurance payment for the kids. You got to do all that, all those things that we got to do to make a living, right? You got to get all that money. It's like, oh dang, if you own a business, you got to make payroll. You got to pay your taxes. You got to do all the stuff that goes along with life, right? And so the fight of that is what's getting you through your day. You being able to fight your way through your day by firing up your sympathetic nervous system, by trying to drive that sympathetic nervous system all the time, by fighting through the moment, by fighting all the tigers that Coach Leach used to say, swing your sword, right? That for those of you who are Tech football fans, and good job to our Red Raiders this weekend, by the way. But Coach Leach used to say, swing your sword. Just think about that's what you do during the day. If you get up in the morning, get yourself a big cup of coffee, get yourself going, and then you have to get the kids to school, then you have to get the business going, or you have to get to work, and you have to fight yourself through the day, right? But as soon as you sit down, you're just tired. It's like, I could just go to sleep, man. If I sit down for 5 minutes, I'm asleep. Like all of a sudden, I'm asleep. And it's like, how come? Well, because the resting and recovering part of your nervous system is not catching up with all that fighting that you have to do in a day. And when you look at it on a graph, what you see is how that's way over here you just add your plus sign, you're way over here on the left side. You're over here on the left side of this graph. And that means that you're down regulating your rest and recover part of your nervous system. And as soon as your fighting part of your nervous system just relaxes, you crash, right? And a sick person, now you got your plus sign, just take it down to the bottom left quadrant. That bottom left quadrant is the quadrant that you get into when you start to get really sick. That's disease right there. And that's something you want to try to avoid if you plan on living longer and having a great life. If you don't plan on living longer and you don't want to have a great life, then don't worry about that quadrant. Doesn't make any difference. We're talking about wellness on this show. This is Life with Jason Clemmons, DC, and we're talking about wellness. So where do we want to be? We want to be over here in the top right quadrant, and we want to be able to rest and recover. So why would a person not rest and recover? Right? Because they're fighting all day, but those receptors that are going along with that parasympathetic nervous system have now become exhausted. Well, that's a bad thing. And the first thing that let's think about, number one, is are you getting the proper fuel? Are you getting the proper nutrition into your body to give your body a chance to grow those receptors and to have all of the supply that it needs to get you back to this other side of the cross, right? We want to be over here on this right side. We want to be on the right side of the cross. How how interesting is that? We kind of walked right into that, didn't we? That was not planned at all. You want to live on the right side of the cross. That is key to being well for a long time. That's a key for making things work, is being on the top right side of the cross, right? And so this pathway of being on this left side of the cross, the first thing is, are we getting enough fuel? What kind of nutrients are we putting into the body? Are you giving your body what it needs in order to function properly, right? And then number two, are you delivering that fuel into the cell? And the way that you're doing that a lot of times is through receptors that are on the cell wall. If you have receptors on the cell wall and your brain releases parasympathetic chemicals, so if your brain releases a parasympathetic chemical and it's meant to go attach to one of those receptors, but those receptors are they're malfunctioning because they don't have the proper fuel, then your brain can't get you to move back towards resting and recovering. Okay? So if you don't have the proper fuel and then you don't have the proper delivery, then you're not going to get that in there. So that's why it all fits together, right? It all fits together because we're trying as hard as we can to be well. Well, if you there's a lot of aspects to being well. And so if you're trying as hard as you can to be well, then nutrition is a major part of how you're supposed to be well, right? It's vital that you get the proper nutrients into your body. Now, there are certain things that you can do to drive those systems harder and harder and harder, but it would really help. So when people say, Doc, well, okay, what should I do? Should I exercise? Should I eat right? Should I get my rest? Should I get adjusted? What are the things that I should do? And the answer to that question is yes, all of those things, right? That's and they all fit together, and it's really hard to make your body function well if you're not getting those things together. So that's one thing is fuel and fuel delivery. And then the third thing is activation. Are you getting any movement to the body? Are you driving the body in a proper way to get the body to function the way it's supposed to? Right? And so if you took this plus sign that we're looking at and you started and you took a brain and you just made that plus sign into a brain, the first information is up there and to the right, right? So are you getting enough power to your right brain to kick the information over to the left, right? Are you getting enough power up there to that right brain? And so are you walking? And someone says, well, no, but I do my elliptical. Well, it's not exactly the same. The elliptical machine is not exactly the same as the walking because there's a mechanism that goes along with walking that goes along with the brain. It goes along with the cross crawl pattern. It goes along with the way your feet fire and your knees fire. And there's a little bit of the way that works together is firing your brain and giving your brain the right power that it needs in order to work like it's supposed to. And so if you're not walking, then you're decreasing brain function. And so if you're not functioning the way you want to function, if your body's not functioning the way you want it to function, one of the things that you could do that's super simple is walk every day. Go for a 30 to 45-minute walk every single day, and you'll start to notice that your body starts to function better. If you would just move your feet and walk. If you're having a hard time with something, if you've got acid reflux, or your posture's wrong, or your hormones are wrong, or any of those things that are going on, just get up and walk. We're coming up on a break on the radio. We'll be back in just a few minutes. I'll see you guys right after the break. Great. I want to take this time on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter to just say how much I appreciate the conversation that we had last week. For those of you who watched the show last week about the cold therapy, and I want to touch on a little bit of that and get into some of the just finish up on that osteoarthritis thought with my mom, and the knee replacement stuff that she was going through, and I want to just share some nutritional information. But we had some really good conversations over the weekend about what we were talking about with that cold therapy, and the one of the big things about the cold therapy is it's just extreme and it's just a window to it's a tool to get yourself into the up and to the right, over to the left pathway. It's not magical. It's not trickery. It's sure not a cult or something crazy like that, right? It's just neurology. It's just physiology. Being in the cold like that, and I didn't know this till last week. Hang on, we're back already. All right. We are back on the show. That was fantastic. That was shorter than I thought. I'm glad you guys are here. And we're this is Life with Jason Clemmons, DC. This is Monday, October 2nd, and we're talking about that parasympathetic sympathetic nervous system. And you're saying, Jason, why are you doing that? Because you just talked about that last week. And I'm like, well, I got some good feedback on it about how it helped, and I wanted to just try to continue it forward a little bit to talk about it so that maybe we could say it in a few different type of sentences. The fuel delivery, the activation. Maybe we could say it in a few different ways that maybe people would understand it a little bit better, right? Because it is really important from a overall standpoint about how your body functions. And last on Thursday we got into the cold therapy, and I want to touch on that in the second segment. Is we got into the cold therapy, and we started talking about what was going on in the cold treatment, right? We were talking about Wim Hof, the Iceman, and I studied him some more this weekend when I had a chance to, and he will tell you the same exact thing. Like he stumbled on it himself through tragedy. He had a major tragic tragedy in his life. His wife committed suicide. He had 4 young kids. He had to overcome a very horrific situation. And what he did is he created a way from a bottom up approach to create a top down suppression. And I know that means that's confusing. You remember a couple of weeks ago when we did the body keeps the score, and when we talked about trauma, and we talked about that thalamus that hit and fired down into that amygdala, and it hit it so hard that when the signal came up from the cortex and down, the amygdala stopped it, and now we've got lower brain activity, and we've got escape, and now we are seeing tigers everywhere, right? Well, that's what happened to Wim. He went through a moment like that in his life where that was happening to him right there. Well, he had been going into cold for a longer period of time since he was a little kid. He'd been getting into cold, and he got back into nature. He thought, my way out of this is to get back into nature. And if I can get back into nature and get back into the oneness with what is right, I can find a way out of this hardship. And he got himself into cold water. And what did it do? It got him back into the moment. It got him back into it created so much adrenaline in the right hemisphere because he fired his cortisol. He fired his adrenal glands, which fired his cortisol, which fired his adrenaline. But you also have adrenaline that gets created inside your brain. It's epinephrine in the body and norepinephrine in the brain, right? So he had so much adrenaline that was flowing that what he was able to do because of the cold therapy, he was able to drive through to the right hemisphere and shut this lower hemisphere, this signal from the thalamus to the lower hemisphere off. And it took an extreme amount of cold, right? He had to get into cold weather, and he had to get into an extreme amount of cold in order to create that. And he said when they got him in the lab and they started testing that, if you're going to go back and listen to Dr. Huberman talk about Wim Hof, he was and that's a guy's name, Wim Hof, Wimhof. And so he started talking about what happens with cold therapy and the increase of adrenaline on the right side. I think he said 300 or 400%. I'll have to go back and test that, but 300 to 400% increase in adrenaline. Well, that is so much power to that right upper hemisphere that he was able to shut this mechanism down here. Now the cortex could go shut off the amygdala. We could get rid of all the tigers, and he could kick it over to this side. And how do I know that's what happened? The reason I know that's what happened is because Dr. Huberman explains it. There was a 2.5 increase in dopamine for 3 to 4 hours after cold exposure. You continue to you get a climb of increase over to the left brain. The left side of the brain has an affinity for dopamine. So you get that up and to the right, over to the left function when you get into the cold. And that's a very extreme way. It's a very extreme way to fire that pathway. And it's, but what they found out was his body, whenever he did that, he got rid of his depression. He got rid of his anxiety. The left hemisphere is where you have focused attention. Okay? So, patient is fired into the right hemisphere, but we don't have enough power or we're stuck in the right hemisphere and we can't kick the information over to the left. So, what do we get? We get low left hemisphere activity and we get overactivity of the right side. So, what are you going to be dealing with in your life? You're going to be dealing with anxiety and depression. You're just anxious all the time. You don't feel well. You're just anxious all the time. And then what are you going to be dealing with on the other side? Attention deficit disorder, right? You have attention deficit disorder, hogwash. You do not have attention deficit disorder. You just have attention deficit on the left hemisphere. Let's get very specific about the definition right there, right? The reason they want you to have attention deficit disorder is so that you can have a medication for the disorder. But what if you change that one word? Instead of attention deficit disorder, what if you marked out disorder and we said attention deficit in the left hemisphere, ADLH? That's what I've got. I've got focused. I've got FADLH. I've got FADLH. That's what I got going on. I've got focused attention deficit in the left hemisphere. And now ask yourself, why? You got a child at home that's got that problem? Why? Because of this right here. They're not getting that right side to left side activity. Right? It's not happening. That right side is not getting, is underactive in power or it's overactive in stress. And it can't get that pathway across. And because it can't get the pathway across, we've got decreased activity in that left hemisphere, right? You know what's super cool what Dr. Huberman said? Chocolate. Oops, I hit the wrong button. Chocolate gives us a 2.0 increase in dopamine on the left hemisphere. But you know what it doesn't do? It doesn't give us any increase on the right hemisphere in adrenaline. You don't get adrenaline from eating the chocolate. You just get the dopamine. Why are you eating the chocolate? Because you lack that, you have low activity of your left hemisphere, which is causing you to want to go out there and search for some sort of chemical that you can take to get that left side hemisphere to work properly, right? So it's not attention deficit disorder. It's focused attention deficit on the left hemisphere. Why would your brain do that? Why would your brain not be able to focus in the left hemisphere? The reason it can't focus is because it's over focusing on the right hemisphere because somewhere in there it thinks there's a tiger. Right? I know you guys are like, Jason, you've covered this same stuff over and over and over. And I'm like, yes, I have. Because you can't get to wellness until you get this done. Everything that happens below that in your body is secondary to what's going on up here. And there's a little bit of maybe a little bit of argument on the microbiome, right? Because the microbiome affects that whole thing. So the bacteria that's inside your gut, is what's affecting that whole thing. So, okay, that's fair enough. Maybe that's I could agree with that. And that might be something that That is true right there. But the question is, how how do you get this to fire, right? You can do this on a normal basis by number one, right? Being social. Number two, walk. Number three, get your eyes up and move them back and forth, right? That's how your brain starts to fire, right? You know, people that are depressed don't want to be social. And I have that over and over and over again and over again. When I ask if you're working on anxiety and depression, if you have anxiety and depression, I ask them, "Are you a social person?" They're like, "I don't like being social. I don't like being around people." Yep. I wanna shrink down into my midbrain. I wanna shrink down into those lower centers that where I'm not functioning properly, where I could just be by myself. And it's like that's not the way your cells function. Your cells function. You are counting on me. And I am counting on you. I'm seriously counting on you. That's part of the reason I want you to be so well. I want you to be well because I'm selfish. That's the honest truth. I want you to be well because my town is better when you're selfish. My state, when you're selfish. When I'm selfish and you're well, my state is better. My nation is better. My world is better when people are healthier. That's what Wim's saying. If you listen to him talk about cold therapy, he wants people to get in the cold water so that they'll drive their brains properly so that they can reach health and happiness. I was like, preach it, Wim. That's the same thing I'm talking about, right? We are trying to solve the same problem. There's so many disorders now, and there's so many people, and that's what the lady today that was my new patient. That's what she told me. She was like, she was like, I can't believe it's taken me so long to find you. And I was like, I'm sorry. But now that you found me, watch the show. And every night from 6 to 7, I'll come on the show and I'll tell you the things that that I know can solve your problem. I know it can solve your problem. And you know what her problem was? It was low right hip pain. Right side hip pain. Why? Because her right cortex isn't firing properly. And what does she have? She had a right bend in her lumbar spine, right? Her lumbar spine is moving to the right. She had right hip pain. You know what all of her providers that she had gone to see was looking at to try to fix her problem? They were looking at her low back. They were telling her that, well, don't work out because it's too dangerous and you might be unstable and you might hurt yourself. They were telling her, and she's been since like I think she told me it's been 2 or 3 years she's been dealing with this pain in her low back. And she's been to multiple doctors and multiple therapists. And you know where they always look? They look to her back. You know why I know that? Because I used to be one of those people until I finally figured out you better look up at the brain first. You better get the brain to fire first. You're never going to be successful on that part down there in the low back, right? So that pathway up and to the right, over to the left is something that's super important, and it's really important to keep yourself healthy, right? So let's go back to that statement that I said earlier. Let's go back to the statement osteoarthritis, right? Because there, what they told my mom was osteoarthritis was the reason that you had knee replacement. Okay, and that's not the right story. It may not be false because okay, fine. But why did the knee deteriorate? Right? That's the question that we need to know. And I'm going to show you this article in Arthritis and Rheumatism, Volume 46, Issue 6, 2002. Pathologic indicators of degradation and inflammation in human osteoarthritic cartilage are abrogated by exposure to N3 fatty acids. And I'm sorry, that's the title of the article. Basically, the inflammation is broken down and equalized by omega 3s. And that's where this whole thing is. And these people wrote this article and they're talking about the objective was to determine if omega-3 fatty acid supplementation versus treatment with omega-6 polyunsaturated or other fatty acid supplements affects the metabolism of osteoarthritic cartilage, right? Does it affect the osteoarthritic cartilage? And so the results, supplementation with omega-3s, but not other fatty acids, reduced in a dose-dependent manner the endogenous interleukin-1, which is some of those chemicals that go along with induced release of proteoglycans, metabolites from articular cartilage, oh, that's too much information right there. Basically, what it says is that it decreased the inflammatory activity of the joint. Similar expressions of mRNA, nope, that's not too much. The conclusion, these studies show that pathologic indicators manifested in human osteoarthritis cartilage can be significantly altered by exposure of the cartilage to omega-3 fatty acids, but not to other classes of fatty acids, right? Let me read that again. The study shows that pathologic indicators, the chemicals in the knee that end up with pathology or degeneration in the knee, the chemicals in the knee that cause degeneration in the knee can be significantly altered by exposure of the cartilage to omega-3 fatty acids. You can decrease the inflammatory process that's going on inside the joint by taking your omega-3s. And it gets into a bunch of these whole things, right? These inflammatory mediators, including eicosanoids, the prostaglandins, the leukotrienes, the thromboxans, mediate through the COX enzymes and the LOX enzymes. Remember when we broke down how your body takes arachidonic acid into that prostaglandin, that inflammatory process? It takes it through those steps and it uses the COX enzymes. And if you block the COX enzymes with a COX inhibitor, your body uses the LOX enzymes to get you down to those leukotrienes and that inflammation. Remember, arachidonic acid flows through the process. So whenever you get into that, whenever your omega-6-3 balance is out of balance, when your omega-6-3s are out of balance, you increase the pathologic mediators of osteoarthritis. You create the chemicals, you allow the chemicals in the joint to wear the joint out and cause the joint to become inflamed and degenerative, right? And they say, well, it's osteoarthritis, like it's some sort of disease process, right? No, it's not. It's a chemical process that happens, and it happens in every single joint of your body. Degeneration in the joints are mainly caused by two different problems. Number one, it's abnormal movement of the joint over time. And number two, it's abnormal chemistry of the joint, right? Those are the two things that cause a joint to wear itself out. We'll go through some more of this stuff right here. Omega-3 supplementation resulted in a dose-dependent decrease in GAG release, those things that cause inflammation, okay? In contrast, supplements with omega-6s did not alter GAG release at any of the concentrations tested. Yeah, taking omega-6s is not going to decrease your inflammatory issue. Omega-6s are fine in very small quantities as long as you don't have any insulin. But if you have insulin, that omega-6 is going to go to arachidonic acid, and then that's going to cause inflammation in the joint. In contrast, supplementation with omega-6s did not alter the GAG. Yeah, I read that one. Supplementation with oleic acid, which is monounsaturated, or palmitic acid, had no effect on those releases either. So we know that it's the omega-3s that make the difference right there. The expression of mRNA for the inflammation mediators COX-2, LOX5, or 5-LOX tumor necrosis factor was nearly abolished in cultures supplemented with omega-3 fatty acids. The expression of mRNA for the inflammatory mediators, the things that cause inflammation, were virtually abolished by the omega-3 fatty acids. The omega-6 cause no change in the expression of mRNA for these inflammatory mediators. Following omega-3 supplementation, expression of all of those was barely detectable. That comes from the article right there. Following omega-3 supplementation, expression of mRNA for COX-2, interleukin 1, and 5 LOX was barely detectable, meaning if you get your omega-6-3 ratio balanced, you will decrease the possibility that your knee will deteriorate to the point where you have to have that fixed. And yeah, it's too late for my mom's um, right knee. We still got a chance with her left knee, and we got a chance with your knees if they haven't been replaced yet. So when we get into the discussion of that article, the results of the study indicate that exposure of the cartilage to omega-3s can cause those indicators to go away of osteoarthritis. Have you been told that before, like your hands? You've been told I've got osteoarthritis in my hands, right? Think of it in another way. I have an imbalance of omega-6-3 ratio of omega-6 fatty acids and omega-3 fatty acids in my hands. And it's so prevalent. It's so normal for people to have degenerative disc. It's so normal in our society today that we think that's just like a part of life. Like we just should. Yep, my grandma had it. My mama had it. My grandma had it. I've got it. I'm sure my daughter's going to have it. It's so common. And when we go to the hospital to get the knee replaced, the people at the hospital tell us they're good folks. I loved them. They were super great to my mom. The nurses over there, especially Brian, man, thanks a lot. If you're watching the show, thanks a lot for taking care of my mom. They did a fantastic job. But what they didn't tell my mom was exactly the truth, because it's just the same. It's the normal now. It's the normal. It's the normal to take Tylenol. It's the normal to take ibuprofen. Like, and that's what it was normal. That's what got me to do this, right? So when I get these articles and I say, hey, listen, human osteoarthritis cartilage expresses modulators of inflammation and joint destruction. Human osteoarthritic cartilage, the cartilage that you have in an osteoarthritic joint, the in between those bones, expresses modulators of inflammation. It's got inflammation inside there. The heat in there, the inflammatory process that's going on inside the joint, the chemical, the chemical, I don't. Reaction, the chemical reaction inside the joint is what's causing the joint to melt. It's what's causing the bone to deteriorate. It's what's causing the disc in the cartilage to melt. That inflammatory, those modulators of inflammation. All of the disease markers present in osteoarthritis articular cartilage could be completely reduced by culture for 24 hours with omega-3 fatty acids. In the culture, in 24 hours, they could get rid of those markers right there. If you just start taking your fish oil and you just get your body in balance, you can start being healthier tomorrow. Like you don't have to go through this long process. You can start being healthier tomorrow. Then, if you can get the proper fuel to the body, now you can start walking. Think about that. I can start taking my fish oil today and I can start walking and I can start being healthier in 24 hours. If I could do those two things together. And then what will happen with that is you will start to walk and you will start to fire that brain on the right side. And you will start to increase the power that's going to that right brain on the right side. And when you start increasing that power to the right brain on the right side, that will kick over to the left side and you will have an increase in dopamine on the left side. And dopamine will make you feel like there's a reward for keeping going, for doing better. That will drive you. It gives you a drive to want to do better. And when you fire that pathway, decrease your inflammation, just a little bit by taking your omega 3s and start to walk. You can drive that pathway. You can drive up to the right side of the brain. The right side of the brain says, there are no tigers in here. I can see it clearly now. I can see it clearly. There are no tigers in here. And now what am I going to do? I'm going to kick over to the left, and now I'm going to get a natural version of dopamine up on that left side. You can force the issue by getting into cold water, but you need to do that very carefully and make sure you're getting trained and you have the proper help to do that. But you can force that issue. And then as soon as you start that pathway, this is perpetual. Once this pathway starts to fire, you start to get rid of all the tigers on the right side and you start to move into that left side. And now all of a sudden, you're just like, now you can start getting things done. You can have clear mind. You can have calm and peace. Now you can start to rest and recover. You can start to rest and recover, not by getting your sleep only, but by decreasing your inflammation and increasing your walking. Thank you guys for this show. Thanks for listening. I hope I'm helping you. If you got questions for me, please send in any questions that you got. Can't wait to talk to you. I'll try to get them all answered if I can. And um, then we'll be back tomorrow night at 6. And then on Wednesday, we're breaking down the book, Hacking of the American Mind. It's by Robert Lustig, and it's a book on dopamine. And you'll love it because it's talking about some of the things that's happening with sugar and how sugar and dopamine go together. So you probably hear it for one more time. I'll see you guys tomorrow night.